Hello, my name is Talia Dinger, and I am seeking a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting and a minor in Education. I have been drawing since I could hold a pencil. Art has always been a passion of mine. I typically work in acrylic paint but like to break away and try something new from time to time. I recently began working with themes involving mental health, specifically my own. I started using this as my signature theme to discover and reflect on feelings I currently have or have had in the past. I have been overwhelmed with situations that were happening as they were affecting my actions and thought process. I was tired of dealing with it internally and wanted to use art as a healthy way to express myself because therapy is too expensive. So let's get to it. In my early years at Colby Sawyer College, and before I started exploring my emotions, I was heavily into Greek mythology, so most of my art at the time revolved around that. This piece was inspired by the myth of Artemis and Actaeon. In the myth, Actaeon was wandering the woods on a hunting trip and fell upon the goddess Artemis bathing in a river. Out of rage, Artemis turns Actaeon into a deer, which causes his hunting dogs to attack and kill him. I made the deer out of clay to add layers and movement to the piece. This was a fun project that helped me work on darker themes. Going along with the Greek concept, I decided to work more with conveying emotion rather than action. I focused on the Greek myth of the changing seasons with Demeter. Demeter has a very close relationship with her daughter Persephone, but due to a kidnapping, she has to share Persephone with Hades. So during the spring is when she gets Persephone back from Hades. Summer is their relationship in its prime. Fall is Demeter preparing to let Persephone go again. And winter is her alone, and the cycle continues. I wanted to capture the transition from fall to winter, as this is where Demeter's emotions are the strongest. Demeter herself looks cold and aging as she mourns for her daughter, while the landscape is still in the warm fall colors, giving a sense of the pending change of weather and time. For this Greek-themed beauty, I wanted to do something different. I love going to the beach and collecting shells, but had so many at the time, so I tried to make a project involving them. I decided I wanted to make a painting involving my favorite god Poseidon. The most common myth with him is the one involving Odysseus. Odysseus is an arrogant man that has insulted Poseidon on multiple occasions. In return, Poseidon tried to kill him at sea multiple times. I wanted to use the shells as a cool way to incorporate texture and lighting of water. I glued the shells on a frame piece of wood and painted over them to hide the natural look shells have. I thought having a wave crash over the boat would give the piece a more action quality while having the shells flow in their natural shape to form a picture. This was a very different painting for me to do. I haven't done a self-portrait since MTV was just music. Since this was a project I was a bit uncomfortable about already, I decided to experiment with brushstrokes and color. That day, I happened to be wearing a dad sweater I thrifted and wanted to make it a highlight in the piece and decided I would try to incorporate the pattern on the shirt throughout the whole painting. I did struggle with the background and couldn't find anything that would complement the sweater's design. It took me a few tries, but came to the decision that the only thing that would complement a dad sweater is another dad sweater. I chose to use a common clothing design from the 80s to use as the background to make the piece as a whole stand out. This piece started off my journey with my mental health. I have a girl in an uncomfortable crouching position surrounded by words that I ask myself daily. The black and white boxes represent outside pressures that can change the outcome of personal thought. I decided to use primary colors only because I felt this gave this topic a pure abstract feeling as well as standing out against the black and white. This color palette is recurring in some of my pieces regarding mental health. To add to the last piece, I decided to really harness this feeling of anxiety and make a 3D model of it as well. I wanted this piece to make you feel overwhelmed without telling you to do so. I decided to use fake floral stems with all the flowers ripped off and bent to represent the intruding thoughts and placed an embroidery ring around it to define a space. I then dipped the whole piece in plaster to give it that vibrant white color that could make the viewer interpret it in their own way. I thought at this stage the piece wasn't overwhelming enough and decided to add a crouching figure made out of plaster to show emotional pressure. Speaking of pressures, the holidays are a big one for me. I personally only see my family during the holidays, and sometimes it's the most stressful thing I go through each year, as I'm sure other people think as well. Holidays add a whole different level of anxiety for me. Am I moving at the same pace as everyone else? Did I do enough things this year to brag about? Is my family still proud of me? Questions like this make me feel suffocated, so that's exactly what I did. I made the color palette more realistic rather than primary to make it feel real, because at some point or another, our family makes us go crazy even when we love them. Still focusing on the mind, I made this piece in representation of how sometimes your own thoughts can be heavy influencers. I originally only had the girl crouching like we have seen in previous works, but felt that wasn't enough to get my point across. I decided to add skeletons to act as protectors because sometimes the thoughts that are caused from anxiety are meant to protect yourself from what the mind thinks is danger. This piece is different from what I have done before. I normally don't do abstract art because I'm a control freak. I like planning out my pieces. I had this big 3-foot by 2-foot canvas and had no idea what to do with it. I started painting the whole canvas blue but hated it, so I painted it pink but didn't like that either. I painted it white again but still wasn't feeling it, so I went back to the blue and I still hated it like I did to the first time. I thought to myself, maybe you're thinking about this too much, so I decided to let go and have free range of whatever I felt like doing. When I paint, I usually watch Netflix and happen to be listening to a murder documentary for this one. I just let loose and let the document influence my train of thought. I thought this method was a good way for me to understand that it's okay to let loose and let the hand do the painting. I guess this is when I truly started to understand abstract art. This was a fun illustration I did for an alumni that I befriended during my visits here at Colby Sawyer. She's a beautiful writer, and I asked if I could make an illustration for one of my favorite poems she has written. The poem is about her realizing she is bisexual. In her poem, she mentions that some people like vanilla and some people like chocolate, but she likes the twist. I thought that using ice cream was a clever way to describe the attraction to both genders, so I used that imagery. I had a lot of fun drawing this, and it was a nice break from dealing with my own emotions while still working in a serious tone. During my first semester of freshman year here at Colby Sawyer, I was in an ATV accident. I was riding on the back of one, and my foot got caught and dragged under the wheel while we were airborne. I didn't break any bones, but I was sent home in crutches. I have had problems ever since and haven't been able to do all the things I used to do with ease. During lacrosse season, this especially becomes a problem for me. I couldn't get through practice without being in pain, let alone a game. No one knew what was causing me so much pain, so it was hard to make assessments on how to make it better. I finally ended up getting surgery this past June. The doctor cleared out a large amount of scar tissue that left me in a boot all summer. I had so much pent-up rage and sadness from 3 long years of people not knowing what was wrong, or not believing I was in pain in the first place. I let out all those emotions into this piece. I often joked about cutting my foot off to solve the problem, so I use this as my solution for this piece and attach negative things I have been told or have thought to myself. This was a great way for me to come to terms with my injury so I could move on. This is the first series I have ever made. These pieces are supposed to be bold and harsh and leave the viewer thinking. These types of questions are meant to be seen by anyone because they can be applied to anyone, including myself. I often worry about the future and how it's going to turn out. I often worry that I won't be happy in the long run, which is one of my main goals in life. I wanted to pour the stress I have for the future into these pieces. I want to be able to look in the mirror when I'm old and say, yes, I am satisfied. Yes, everything I have done was worth it. And I will be happy for the rest of my days. This last piece is a reflection on all my pieces I have done throughout my emotional journey. I have an underlying fear that at some point I will disappoint someone close to me. I wanted to ask the people I'm close to that understand me and my situation if they are still proud of what I'm doing. I use the same character I have in previous pieces because, in a certain way, she is me. I left little Easter eggs that show she is the same person in everything, like the scratch marks on her arm from inside the mind, and the bruise on her neck from It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year. I wanted to make a connection to all my pieces because they all come from the same place. Colby Sawyer has helped push myself in ways I didn't think was needed. Being here has helped me become a true artist as well as a better individual. I can confidently say that I'm moving on to bigger and better things. Thank you for listening.